I'm very excited. I'm Brian Tremont. I am the managing partner at Wilkinson Barker Knauer, and welcome to our fireside chat of U.S. Telecom Regulators. I am joined to my left by Scott Delacourt, Chief of Staff at the FCC. To his left, Adam Cassidy, Deputy Assistant Secretary at NTIA. And on the big screen, in living technical color, is former Commissioner, FCC Commissioner Nathan Symington. So I want to thank our great set of panelists for joining us this morning. I'm going to start with an open-ended question, and all the panelists are friends, so we're going to have hopefully a very freewheeling conversation here. But we'll start with Scott. At a high level, what would you describe as the 2 or 3 highest priorities for U.S. telecom policy for the year ahead?
Yeah, so thanks, Brian, and thanks for having me. So I think to lead off, deployment of broadband networks has got to be the number one priority, and that is kind of something that Chairman Carr has put at the forefront with his build agenda. There's a number of aspects to that, making more spectrum available, taking on infrastructure reform, looking at commercialization of space and satellites as a broadband platform, and stabilizing the USF fund and making sure that those resources are available for deployment. So we'll definitely be focusing there, and there's a lot more underneath those 4 pillars in terms of active proceedings to ensure that networks are deployed to support developing use cases like AI. That's been a lot of the discussion this morning. I think the second big priority is deregulation, and deregulation not for its own sake, but in support of economic growth and making sure that resources are appropriately allocated in the economy. And we're really focused on that in our delete proceeding. The focus there is on looking at regulations that are outdated because they address technologies that no longer exist, or they've been repealed by a court, or that speak to technology transitions that have already elapsed. And having those regulations on the books imposes costs on companies who have to think about and comply with them. We want to clear that underbrush, and we're doing that to some extent with short-form proceedings where we can, like direct final rules. We're doing that where there's, what we consider to be really deadwood regulation that no one really supports and can be gotten rid of easily. And then we've got to deal with the harder questions around deregulation in areas where there are equities on both sides. Some people see continuing value in the rules where other stakeholders may not, and that's something that we'll be addressing in the near future.
Very good. Okay, that's 2 for you. How many you got, Adam?
We've got a few. So I think getting the job done on BEAD, finishing the work. Those who track these sorts of issues, and just for context, BEAD is a broadband build-out program that the NTIA administers, trying to bridge the digital divide. For those of you who track these sorts of things, NTIA has made sort of speed a central feature of its reforms. I think we've actually just gotten our first final proposal in, so we have 90 days to action that. Exciting stuff. But really, I think focusing up on finishing that job is going to be job one for NTIA, certainly over the course of the next year, just as a matter of necessity. Secondly, obviously, we have one big, beautiful bill. We've been calling it internally OB3. I've heard there are a number of names for it, but to us, it's OB3. Obviously, that has tasked both the NTIA and FCC with identification of spectrum for commercialization, and that mighty and awesome task falls to our Office of Spectrum Management to begin the identification of those bands, and certainly we have some notions around that, but in general, trying to keep a relatively open and flexible mind there. A couple of other things that are, I think, of sort of personal importance to me. One is we've got to do something about space policy reform. This has been, and obviously this is a big area of focus for the FCC too, and they've already been doing really yeoman's work on this topic. and I think NTIA will take some inspiration from them. But we just had sort of space dominance EO hit last week that specifically tasks the Secretary of Commerce, among other things, to identify those areas that may be ripe for improvement when it relates to space permissioning in general. There's a lot of process and churn around this topic, and I think that we could see some improvements there, and I think that's going to be an area of focus for me. Lastly, winning the race to 6G. It's very important for our principal, for our secretary, deputy secretary. We want the sort of next generation of wireless leadership to be led by the United States, and we think there's a really interesting opportunity in front of us to do that. So I do think those will be the areas of focus for us.
Excellent, thank you, Adam. And Commissioner, welcome.
Well, thank you. It's, I guess, I missed the details in the invitation. Should have been former regulators panel, but nonetheless, I'm going to since I agree with everything that everyone said so far, and since Scott picked 2, I'm going to pick 4. The first thing I'm going to say is network integrity and security. This is a big topic. I'm sure we'll come back to it later, but I think we have to pin it because the assumptions that undergirded the National Communications Network that it was initially built by Bell Systems substantially are just no longer tenable. We're no longer living in a world that is primarily facilities based. Instead, substantially everything is wireless and connected to the internet. And once we get fully real about that, we'll be able to assure the American people that they have the security and performance and privacy and security that they expect of national communications networks that are substantially regulated businesses. This is part of the general theme, this is my point too, just to keep score, of telecom moving away from just being about the end user device, whether that's a phone or a TV. Increasingly, we are seeing worldwide telecommunications technologies incorporated at a very fundamental and open level into infrastructure operations. So if we have a telecom policy that doesn't explicitly have a role for ports or for, let's say, transatlantic cable resilience or a very large number of things, then we're not really talking about a telecom policy. We're assuming a degree of technological sovereignty and security that just may not be there. And without that load-bearing pillar assured in place, again, we don't really have a telecom policy that's fully worthy of the United States. Third one, this is a pet issue of mine, but I think it's an important one. We need to save television as a medium. I think substantially the way to do that is to tie its potentially high upside data transmission economics to the preservation of local journalism. That way you kill 2 birds with 1 stone. You have a major infrastructure provider that provides a particular type of data infrastructure at attractive price and resilience points, and you have it subject to the public interest standard that we all know and love from the FCC, thus preserving one area of at least minimally regulated media. To be quite honest, I think people are not quite prepared to enter the total wild west of total unregulated media. And so the idea that there are at least some standards, that there's at least one medium of transmission that truly is subject to the public interest requirement is, I think, something that threads the needle between most political camps in the United States. So I think there's an outsized interest in preserving that. Finally, I guess the last thing is we need telecom sovereignty. That's partly a matter of equipment, partly a matter, as Pete Cassidy said, of managing the 6G transition in a forward-looking way. I'm sure we're going to talk about that more as well. But one aspect of this that isn't always on the table is international competition. International competition could be put off when we had truly free markets internationally and we're not dealing with the conditions of, I guess, what you might call neo-mercantilism or something like that. But as it stands, the United States is suffering from the lack of any plausible national level champion in this area and any plausible national level comprehensive sovereign technology package to be offered to friends and allies. The United States is a huge country and it's a rich country, but at the end of the day, we're about 5% of the world population, which means the other 19/20ths are also going to want to buy telecom equipment. And if the answer for their industrial and governance needs runs substantially through the PRC with us not offering any alternatives, then they will turn to the PRC, and our own suppliers, since we don't want PRC equipment in our networks, our own suppliers will falter. So I think solving for those 4 points, those are the things I, as an ex-regulator, would like to see from the outside.
Unhindered by government responsibilities. Thank you, Nathan. All right, let's switch over to, Adam mentioned OB3, which I think has a trademark problem with a satellite company, but we'll figure that out later. OB3 restored a spectrum auction authority to the FCC finally after a long gap. What are the next steps there? This is obviously a joint challenge because of the nature of the shared responsibility between the FCC and NTIA. So I'll sort of ask Adam and Scott to answer this question together. What's coming next? What are the challenges for each of your agencies? And how do we view this in the next year to year and a half in terms of what we can see tangibly happening to get back in the spectrum game?
Scott, you want to go first?
I guess I can go ahead. Yeah, I mean, the OB3, as we're calling it, it was very specific about what we need to do. We need to identify 800 megahertz of new spectrum to be auctioned, and we've got some bands identified that we're working on already. Of course, the AWS3 re-auction is in the queue, and we know that we need to identify at least 100 megahertz of spectrum from the C band. But of course, that doesn't get us to 800. We'll have to look at other bands, and there are candidates out there, including the 7 to 8 gigahertz band and the CBRS band, and they all have puts and takes to them. There are challenges, there's no easy gives, and we're gonna have to look at all of it. But it is an important priority. We're gonna have to, if we're gonna maintain US leadership in the wireless area, and in broadband, we're going to need to identify the spectrum resources to support that. And it's a matter of national security, and so we're going to really have to make it a primary focus over the next several years and over the short term.
Yeah, that's all accurate. And I really view NTIA's role as playing a sort of supporting and coordinating role for the FCC. Ultimately, it will be FCC that auctions off the spectrum. We have a sort of 500 megahertz piece of this obligation. We aren't under the same kind of time crunch as it relates to getting some spectrum auctioned off in the next couple of years. But nevertheless, we have some bands that OB3 has teed up to identify for study. Upper 7, mid 4. A few others, we're looking at 2.7 as well. There are a variety of areas that we want to focus on, but really the goal is going to be, possibilizing that commercialization, seeing where flex is available, seeing where compression is available in old systems, and so on. That's really the nuts and bolts of what it is that the NTIA does in support of overall spectrum commercialization, and we're only too happy to do it.
So Nathan, I'll bring you in on this. You touched on the importance of international competitiveness for 5G. So how does OB3, I can't believe I'm doing this now. How does OB3 fit into that plan? Is it enough? How are we doing with our current 5G ecosystem, and what does it portend for 6G?
How are we doing? So in the United States, we've been very focused on the consumer 5G proposition. We've obviously had enormous capital expenditures in pursuit of 5G consumer proposition. I guess I would say that there's no clear killer app that's yet emerged in the consumer space. And so we have to ask, is anyone making money on 5G anywhere worldwide? Personally, I think 5G is an amazing standard. You look at how it works technically, and it's there's all kinds of incredible stuff in there. It's obviously we need to move to 5G off LTE, and yet many aspects of that standard don't really seem like they're tailored to the consumer value proposition. I'm not saying there will never be a 5G consumer value proposition, but as in many other areas of telecom history, the value proposition may emerge elsewhere first. So to get specific, if you look at the PRC, what you see is enormous densification in private networking. Far more so than we've seen in the United States. Obviously, that's synergistic with the huge manufacturing industry onshore. That model is increasingly getting exported. So if you're making an auto factory in Brazil, or if you're an air conditioner factory in Thailand, whatever it might be, odds are that you will have Chinese business partners and suppliers at some level, and that you will wind up with a Chinese smart manufacturing tech stack. my back-of-the-envelope math suggests that the Chinese industrial 5G business is worth around 6x what the American consumer 5G business is worth. So I think unless we get real about the need to grow that ecosystem in the United States, we'll be cutting ourselves off from important areas of international competition. What's more, I think we're the only player with the skill to credibly challenge Huawei and other Chinese manufacturers in this area. And if we don't do it, no one else is going to be in a position to step up, just everyone else is too small. So, it seems to me whatever kind of thing we do in spectrum policy, we should allow for a growth pathway there. As far as how that goes with OBBB, I'm going to break the convention. As far as how that works with OBBB, I think OBBB is a step in the right direction in many areas. I also don't think it was intended to be a conclusive reform on the larger question of what an American sovereign 5G tech stack would look like, including in a form that would be valuable to our friends and allies abroad, and figuring out what we want to do with that, putting the resources behind it, and then making it part of our tech diplomacy for the 2026 and 2027 conferences is going to be a fundamental part of supporting the American national interest.
Great, thank you, Nathan. So for Adam and Scott, Nathan pulled out the fact that the Chinese private 5G ecosystem is 6 times the size of our consumer ecosystem for 5G. How disconcerting is that? Should we be troubled by it? Does it drive any policy decisions for you all? And then more broadly, how do you view the United States competitively in the world on 5G?
Yeah, I can start with that. Listen, I don't know. Let me put it like this: I haven't fact-checked Nathan, but I am given to believe him. Let me put it like that. China invested in 5G on the thesis that what they were doing was not necessarily building telecommunications networks. They were building industrial verticals possibilized by the 5G protocol, and they've succeeded at that. There are mines and ports and airports that are driven largely by automation made possible by 5G. It's, for instance, the ultra-low latency within 5G is probably more useful as an industrial control protocol than a sort of, a consumer-facing thing. I think we were a little bit spoiled when it came to the 4G and 4G LTE revolution, which, really catalyzed just a tremendous explosion of consumer apps. It would have been a very difficult sophomore effort in the consumer space to sort of meet that excitement and the standard created there. Nevertheless, what I think all of this sort of comes to sort of a point is that we've got to get very serious about 6G and 6G leadership, both domestically and internationally, both consumer and industrial. And I think that this administration has a very sharp focus on that.
So maybe a little bit of a different take on this and taking it up a higher level. When we look at wireless networks or any network, the question is not, these are enabling technologies. So whether it's 5G or 6G, the network exists with a certain set of capabilities, and the question is not, are those capabilities good enough? It's, what do we want these networks to do? What are the use cases that we're designing them to enable? And with 5G, we know that what has emerged is, one of the surprising use cases that's emerged is fixed wireless as a substitute for home broadband, something that wasn't anticipated when the technology was designed. But we also know that it's furthered use cases that already existed. We've seen increasing penetration of IoT into the home and more of a connected life, and it's also been useful for autonomous vehicles and for drones. I think we'll see growth in all of those use cases. But as we approach 6G, the question's the same as with 5G. What do we want these networks to do? And that's going to drive the standards setting process. What use cases are we optimizing for? And so I don't necessarily think the question is entirely about the networks. It's about use cases and what we want to do with those networks.
Fair enough. Okay, Nathan, I'm going to go back to you on this one. So obviously the FCC has the Universal Service Fund. NTIA has BEAD. lots of money, government money, going into building networks. With the benefit of distance that you've gained from after leaving the commission and having worked in both agencies, how would you reform, what could the United States do to optimize those investment dollars across both those programs in terms of what reforms would you propose? And I'll turn to Adam and Scott, and Adam can talk about what they've already done, and Scott can talk about maybe what they're gonna do now that the Supreme Court has upheld the regime.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, I think we've already seen a very, very welcome pivot, and that's away from the ideology of fiber to the premises as the sole technology of relevance. I mean, this really seems to me like a policy idea that came from 2014, and that's not a criticism, and we have to make policy based on what's available at any given time, but it would be a problem carrying that forward 10 plus years into a period where wireline fiber was not in fact the sole or maybe even primary choice for connectivity in areas that had not previously justified a build-out. So I'm very happy to see BEAD turning to a true technology agnostic approach. It seems to me that we should be funding performance, not specific technologies, and if the right way to deliver a particular performance is over a new technology like low latency space ISPs, or on the other hand, as Scott pointed out, FWA, which again no one foresaw at this level, and yet has accounted for substantially all new line adds for the last 3 years or so. It's on net. It's difficult to say that we should be sticking with 2014 solutions at a time in 2025 when new stuff is on the table. Starlink didn't even apply for licenses until 2016. So again, we don't need to judge 2014 with the lenses of hindsight so much as we have to say that we need to make policy within the current ambit of technological possibility. I think I think both agencies are doing a much better job of that than they were in the recent past. So it's a heartening development. Just generally, I like the idea of making BEAD boring, standard contracts per BSL caps, tech neutral awards, and then pole and right-of-way reform as a funding condition. I think we're headed very much in that direction. With fixed wireless and LEO, they're real competitors. If they meet SLAs at 40 or 60% of fiber to the home cost, then fiber becomes an ornamental build, and it's really hard to justify public money being used for that purpose. Particularly because fiber will then be competitive with middle mile deployments that might support more users per mile of fiber laid. So all in all, I think both agencies are moving in a pretty good direction. Watching from the outside, I'm pretty happy with how things are going.
Scott, USF reform?
So, in terms of USF reform is a complement to BEAD. We've got to get those networks out to unserved and underserved areas, but we've also got to make sure that consumers can have the resources to adopt the technologies. We're happy with the Supreme Court's decision, happy to be on a solid footing, and that the program's going to continue. We're not having to sort of move into a very uncertain world that depends on legislation or some other fix. But it does put it into our laps the question of stabilizing the USF fund. I think we know that it's no secret the rate base is a declining one, and the contribution factor is going up every year over year. That's not a situation that can persist. So we're going to have to look at contribution reform. That's something that the chairman has spoken about both as a commissioner and as chairman, and I think that's something that will be on the agenda in the near future.
Adam, do you want to say what keeps you up at night still having reformed BEAD already?
Oh, it's just going to be execution, right? So we've implemented a policy change at the direction of our secretary, which is to achieve the benefit of the bargain for the American people and do it in a technology-neutral fashion. We believe we are executing on that. And the early returns are demonstrating just how well that's going. Now, that's great, but when I got there, when we finally got the restructuring policy notice out, I thought, oh, okay, well, that's one big sort of load off my mind. We can maybe take a little break. No, so we have, for instance, 56 eligible entities, states and territories, all of whom are going to be battering down our doors in the next couple of weeks. We've just gotten our first final proposal in. We've given ourselves a 90-day deadline. It is going to be a busy balance of the rest of this calendar year. And I think as or more important as getting the policy right is getting the process right. And so we are heads down on that right now. And we think we're driving toward a good result.
Great. I'm going to try and hit some additional topics on a quick hit basis a little bit. So we're all well aware of the changes in viewing habits, and Nathan touched on this earlier in terms of cord cutting and a move to over-the-top providers. And the FCC just got another court decision on media ownership, has teed up the national ownership cap. Scott, how do you integrate the changing marketplace into those assessments, and what can we look forward to seeing in Chairman Carr's agenda going forward on this topic?
Yeah, well, the media space has evolved, and we need the rules to catch up and regulation to catch up. It's certainly true that consumers don't consume video content in the silos that we regulate that content. So whether it's cable or broadcast or streaming, consumers aren't making those kinds of distinctions. But we as regulators are forced to because of the laws that we have in place. In some sense, those laws may make sense because the different platforms have different characteristics. Broadcast relies on a public resource, the radio spectrum, that other platforms don't rely on, so we've got to take that into account in our regulation. But the fact that all these platforms are competing with one another suggests on a common sense level that there should be some regulatory parity between them. And so our goal, and I think the chairman's goal, is to make sure that we can bring that kind of regulatory parity into place consistent with the existing regulatory frameworks, which limit our ability to do that. But media ownership rules is a good example. Those rules tend to distort competition because they treat one platform differently than others, and I think that's an area that's ripe for reform. We've got requests to liberalize those rules in our delete proceeding, and I think we'll be looking at that soon, and, as well as in the quadrennial review where it's been teed up for a long time.
Yeah, 20 or 30 years.
Yeah.
Adam, I know that you mentioned it in your top 4. The space policy reform is near and dear to your heart, Adam. So do you want to just talk about what you envision, what steps the administration should be taking on space policy reform?
Sure. I think if you talk to the smallest commercial operators, and by the way, our sort of commercial space future is going to be driven largely by companies founded in the last 10 years and even founded in the last 5. And if you ask them, what is their greatest point of pain in interaction with the United States government, it's just, hey, can I launch my bird? Can I do the thing? Please, at some point, like soon, can I get a yes or a no on that? Thumbs up or thumbs down? It's a process issue. It's not even necessarily a policy issue. It's just dialing in the process so that we can get to rules-based permissioning, so that we can parametrize coordination, so that we can get commercial space sort of, access to the spectrum it needs on a reasonable basis, protecting the federal equities, but doing it in a way that is scrutable, that is legible, that is interrogatable, where that has some openness to it, some transparency to it, and some urgency to it. So this is a sort of a bit of a weedy topic, but if there's one area of focus that I think NTIA can have the most influence on, it's certainly that.
Great. I'm going to throw it open to questions, but I ask one more of the panel, and I'm going to start with Nathan on this one. The president recently released his AI action plan. Do you just want to reflect on that action plan and what key aspects you see for U.S. leadership on AI? Commissioner Simonton?
Sure. Yes, absolutely. Sorry. So as far as the AI action plan, AI and networks generally, I think we've all got to adapt to the new capabilities and to the new pricing of capabilities that AI is bringing online. So just, to pick one example and surface it that may not be, instantly apparent, is that automatic AI-powered management of network infrastructure for a telco can result in self-healing infrastructure capabilities, and can result also in much lower management costs, thus shifting fundamentally the cost of infrastructure in the long term to the provider in terms of what it costs to operate. So, so the AI action plan is, I think, a real, again, a step in the right direction, and a way of clearing out some of the underbrush that was threatening to develop, where every jurisdiction and every agency was going to have its own little bespoke AI ideas in there. As far as taking the AI action plan forward, I don't think we would assume that this closes the question. I think it's very much directed at opening up the question instead. It seems to me that both the NTIA and the FCC should be explicitly developing AI pathways to address persistent problems or just persistent pain points or things that were persistently difficult and expensive to do. In the case of AI at the FCC, for example, it seems to me that there are obvious opportunities for fraud enforcement, spoofing, stir-shaking enforcement, and then also for enabling backhaul siting and edge spectrum deployment. So there's a lot that could be going on there. I think the FCC will also need to start explicitly quantifying data center constraints in order to figure out what AI capabilities can be localized and brought online. That's going to be a question when AI latency becomes an issue, and you can't merely ping a data center and wait an unlimited number of milliseconds for a response. The FCC should probably expect of carriers that carrier-grade anomaly detection for spam and fraud will become baked into compliance rapidly. As far as NTIA, it seems to me that the NTIA has science and safety benchmarks that it's constantly superintending, and that getting to a boring and predictable AI-based audit of all of this is a big part of how the NTIA is going to continue to deliver on a big budget with a relatively small staff. That's, again, probably a pathway for the future, and the point is that the President's actions on AI have opened up those lanes for both those agencies.
Scott and Adam, you want to discuss the President's action plan and your respective agencies' roles?
Sure. I mean, so we were given a variety of very specific sort of workflow tasking from the AI action plan, but I think the call more generally is sort of, thou shalt use AI, sort of, and there are a variety of opportunities at NTIA. You can think of, for instance, just all of the spectrum coordination problems that are managed manually. And I don't just mean like, a frequency assignment, which sure can be possibilized by AI, but maybe like replying to emails, that kind of thing, which certainly is ripe for an LLM. It's like that's sort of what they do. So even just gathering together available years and years of unstructured data as it relates to coordination issues, gathering together structured data perhaps as it relates to federal equities systems and sort of housing them within NTIA, and then perhaps using some machine learning to automate certain aspects of frequency assignment and so on. These are things that I think are very low-hanging fruit. They're not even hanging necessarily. They're just sort of on the ground. We have to pick them up.
All right, Scott, you want to close us out, and then we'll open it up to questions.
Yeah, in terms of the FCC, we're a little bit limited in what we can do on AI in terms of our jurisdiction and our role. We're not the Federal Software Commission or the Federal Computer Code Commission, but rather our focus is on regulating networks. And I think what we can do to expedite a move to the AI future and support that evolution is to ensure the deployment of advanced networks, of robust, high bandwidth, high speed networks that data-intensive AI applications will demand. And the challenge is going to be, as always, doing that in an expeditious way, in a way that keeps up with the increasingly with the rapid growth in data-intensive demands. Our regulatory processes don't always keep up with technology as a matter of speed. particularly if you think about wireless networks and spectrum allocation. That's a process that takes years. AI is going faster than that, so we're going to have to look at new approaches to move things faster so that we can keep up with the growth.
All right, questions? I see Drew, so we have the microphone, and Mr. Harris.
Hi, Drew Clark, Broadband Breakfast. My question's for Adam. You said just now the early returns are demonstrating just how well that is going, referring to the BEAD process. How well is it going? I mean, I seriously am interested in your reaction, but let me just put 2 data points on the table. One is the percentage that is going to fiber in the latest proposals by Louisiana and Virginia. Louisiana down from 95 to 80, Virginia at 81%. You know, it is curious that the numbers are for fiber and for LEO satellite, and it was a very interesting discussion on fixed wireless in your panel discussion here, but curious why we're not seeing more of those in these public proposals. And lastly, could you just address your thoughts about how you respond to Elon Musk's statement that even though it was on track for 10% of Virginia locations, he still wants a lot more than that. And so just, how do you manage the technology, or how do you see yourselves interacting with states as they propose a technology mix of fiber, fixed wireless, and satellite?
All right, to Adam, and then we'll take one more question from Scott.
Thank you for that question, Drew. Couple of points as to the first part of your question. Number one, we sort of intentionally baked in some flexibility for states to have a little bit of play in the joints as it relates to how they, on a project area by project area basis, define priority. Broadband project, they knowing their states better than we ever will. And so it is, while we reserve the right to interrogate those decisions, and while we are doing that, nevertheless, we wanted at least at a sort of first cut to say, all right, we're going to let them sort of, take the laboring oar on that piece, and then on the back end, we're going to have a look. The second piece of that I will say is, you haven't, you're seeing final proposals being sort of posted publicly. That is not an approved final proposal. There are going to be probably some work that is done behind the scenes. It's not just because a state comes to us and says, this is my final proposal, while we have a disposition to work with them in good faith, nevertheless, and you'll see this in the RPN, we do sort of retain some oversight ability. So I'll say that, and I'm not going to answer the second part of your question.
Okay, now we have a question from the author of the National Spectrum Strategy. Mr. Harris, did you have a question?
I did. Thank you. So the next World Radio Conference is in about 2 years. It's expected to be unusually consequential, and it's going to be in China, which poses interesting challenges for U.S. interests. My question is, what are your agencies doing right now to prepare for that World Radio Conference, and maybe what the administration is doing more generally to prepare?
Do you want to start with that, or no? All right. So NTIA and FCC both have important roles to play in prepping for Work 27. I would say that we are very thoroughly engaged with the administration. I'm not prepared to share all of the details around that with you here today, but nevertheless, we are taking a close look at everything. How do we prepare to physically be in China with large delegations, for instance, which is a completely non-trivial issue? How do we prepare to start speaking univocally, which is very important as well. This is a big issue of sort of interagency coordination. Suffice it to say, people are thinking very deeply about these issues. I think it's premature to share sort of what that's going to look like in the finer details.
I don't know that I have a ton to add to that. We're kind of running our standard play. We're working on thinking about a work ambassador, thinking about how to address the various discrete agenda items. The security issue looms large. I think that's a diplomatic issue to some degree that's going to be addressed in part by the State Department. But we're preparing as we would for any other war.
Nathan, do you have thoughts on this one?
Well, I can't speak to any agency actions because I'm not at an agency. But I guess I will say that from my perspective, there is a lot more going on, even in the federal government, even outside of FCC and NTIA. I think the federal government's overall approach is not to look at Work 27 as a boring technical conference in which the nerdy engineers will do their nerdy engineering things. No offense to the engineers, since they actually run all this stuff. But the federal government has often, made works a little bit of a sidebar. This one is different. I think this administration is going to be very all hands on deck with regard to Work 27, and we're going to, as Americans, we're going to benefit from the federal government taking this very seriously and taking this as a question of trade strategy, competition strategy, economic development, and technological diplomacy, not merely a standard-setting conference.
Great, thank you. With that, we wrap up our panel. A round of applause for our excellent panelists. Thank you all very much. Mr. Walston.
All right.